Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah wa salatu wassalamu ala al-mursaleen. I want to start by thanking you all for staying and spending this evening with us today. I come from Washington, D.C. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, and the weather, if it was like this entire room would be empty if we were in Wisconsin, because we get about 3 days of weather like this over there. You're very spoiled, but I am not envious. I'm just happy for you. I just want you to know the heaven that you live in Southern California, and I always love to come here. I was really moved by the words of our brother who just spoke on behalf of the 3 winners. I think we've all experienced, as a community, this tragedy in our own ways. For the past several weeks, several months, it seems that our community has been bombarded by tragedy after tragedy, by attack after attack, by suspicion after suspicion. And it's very easy for us, with so much coming at us from so many directions, to simply want to give up, to want to stop engaging, to want to isolate ourselves, find a bunker, a social bunker for us to hide in just until the storm passes. But I have a very different message tonight. I'm here to say that we owe it not just to ourselves, but to America to respond in a very different way. And it's not because we're weak and we need America to save us, but because we need to save America from itself. And these are not mere words. What I want to do tonight is show you with research what I mean and why it's going to be up to us for the next 20 years to save America, to help America grow, to help America keep its promise to itself. Because America is under attack. America is under attack, but not by the enemy it perceives. Yes, of course, violent extremism is real, but there's a far greater enemy because it threatens not just our safety, but our very existence as a democracy. And that is the enemy of fear. Fear can do more harm than any weapon, because fear erodes the very requirement for a democracy. And that is critical thinking. That is a citizenry that is asking questions, that is holding their government accountable. And it is going to be up to us as American Muslims to lead an effort to combat this enemy and to strengthen our democracy. Over and over, we've been asked to prove the absence of something. And that's a very interesting phenomena that's happened to the American Muslim community basically over the past 15 years. We are asked to prove the absence of support for terrorism. You see, the scientists in the room will tell you it's impossible to prove the absence of something. It can't be done. It's impossible. You can prove the existence of something empirically, but it's impossible to prove that something simply does not exist. The only thing you can say is all the tests we can run show that we can't find anything, but you can't prove the absence of something. And so we've been given a task that is literally impossible. Prove to us, and until us, quote us, is convinced that you don't support terrorism, you are under suspicion. The problem is we are answering the wrong question. The quote that Brother Shakil just read to you was the one that I posted on my Facebook page after the horrible attacks in Paris. Because I'm done condemning terrorism. Not because I don't hate terrorism, but because I shouldn't have to condemn it. Because it answers the wrong question. The question that is being asked, sometimes even explicitly now, is, are American Muslims a benign or malignant tumor? Literally, that is the question. There's this foreign body in America called American Muslims, and we just need to know if they're safe or if they're dangerous. When you find a tumor, that's the question you ask. Is it benign or is it malignant? We have lots of doctors in the room, and they can attest for this. If it's benign, then you leave it alone, but you keep it under surveillance, just to make sure. If it's malignant, of course, you remove it. And when we let ourselves, in our own paradigm, succumb to this framing of our community by repeatedly playing into this question and making the case that we are benign, we strengthen and we reaffirm this framing of who we are. We keep answering the wrong question. Because we are not a tumor at all, benign or malignant. We are a vital organ to the body of America. And this is a fact. This is a fact. This is not a cheerleading rally. I'm here to deliver research. American Muslims, disproportionate to their numbers, are job creators. According to the best research, American Muslims are the most likely faith community to be business owners. Small businesses are the engine of job creation in this country. And disproportionate to their size, American Muslims are entrepreneurs. They create jobs. American Muslims are a brain trust in America, one of the most educated faith communities in the country. American Muslims help America lead in being the world's number one producer of knowledge and innovation. American Muslims are themselves innovators. This community makes up about 1 to 2% of the general population and 10 to 15% of Silicon Valley. Disproportionate to their size, American Muslims are innovators. American Muslims are contributors. They are the most likely faith community to be employed and taxpayers. The average age of this community is a full 20 years younger than any other faith community. That means that American Muslims are in the labor force, contributing, not just pulling their weight, but out producing their weight. America is a weaker place without American Muslims. And American Muslims keep America safe. The majority of foiled attacks that would have been carried out by extremists in the name of Islam were stopped by American Muslims. America would be a less safe place without its Muslim citizens. Now, is this the perception of the community that people generally have? The answer is no. But what I want to inspire us to do today is to work to help our fellow citizens see reality as it is. Because the perception is so different from these facts. The perception of our community, according to the best polls, is one where many people, not all, carry a great deal of suspicion. But here are 10 points. This is the top 10 things you should know about bigotry and why it is a threat to America. At ISPU, the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding, where I direct research, we came out with a report a few months ago on state-level anti-Sharia legislation. And the way that we titled the big launch of the report was Canaries in the Coal Mine, Islamophobia as a Threat to All. The idea of canaries in the coal mine, as many of you know, is that minors aren't people under the age of 18. I'm talking about the other kind of minor, ones who go into mines. They would take canaries with them because the bird would pass out if the air was toxic, and then everyone would know that there was something wrong with the air, and they would leave before they themselves were hurt. So a canary in the coal mine is a symbol of someone or something that is more sensitive to the toxicity of the air, but it's a toxic environment that will eventually hurt everyone. And that's what American Muslims are right now. We are the canaries in the coal mine. And that toxic air is that fear that is pumped out day in and day out into the minds and hearts of the American people. We are its first victims, but we are by no means its only victims. And so we have a vital role, a leading role to play in helping America over this challenge it's facing right now. Our country is being threatened by this phenomena, by this toxic political climate. Here's the 10 things that I'd like you to take with you and share with your colleagues, your friends, to help lead a movement to get us past this difficult time in our country's history. Number 1, or number 10 in this top 10 list. Number 10 is this. When the American public is asked about discrimination, the public is saying, this is not just in our minds or in our heads or something that we're only perceiving. The American public is saying that American Muslims are the most discriminated against community in America. That American Muslims are more discriminated against than members of minority racial groups, women, Jews, and other historically marginalized communities. That today, that struggle, the group that is facing the greatest discrimination, according to public perception, are American Muslims. Now, this is actually good news, because when the American people recognize a problem that is inconsistent with their values, they do work to alleviate it. They do work to make change. And there is finally recognition of anti-Muslim bigotry as a reality. Number 9, when asked directly about level of prejudice that people actually hold, the number 1 group that people actually report having prejudice toward are Muslims of any other faith community. So people, 10, they recognize that there's discrimination against American Muslims, and number 9, they're actually admitting to having prejudice against American Muslims as the most negatively viewed religious community in America. So these things are real. They're not just figments of our imagination. Why is this prejudice widespread? That brings me to number 8, the media. According to media content analysis conducted by a firm called Media Tenor based in Germany that does media content analysis all over the world. And media content analysis is a very interesting field of study because they can actually predict the behavior of investors just by looking at the last 3 days of reporting on a specific company. It is that exact. Media content predicts behavior, predicts perception. That it's so exact now as a science and an art that they can make these predictions of investor behavior just by looking at the content of the media. So what did this report show? It showed that 80% of news coverage of Muslim countries in America is negative, not neutral, but negative. 80%. That's in contrast to coverage of a country like North Korea, okay? This is North Korea, not an ally of the United States, a country that is viewed openly as an enemy, where the percentage of negative coverage of North Korea is 71% versus 80% of Muslim countries. That's just the starting point of where the media is. Number 7, militants are representing Islam in the media. The same report showed that whereas religious leaders represent Christianity and Judaism most of the time in the news media, when it comes to Islam, the majority of protagonists representing the faith are armed militants. The American public is not naturally prejudiced. They are being taught and fed fear day in and day out. They are victims of a disinformation campaign. Why is this harmful? Well, it's obviously harmful to a minority community that's being demonized. But is it harmful to the rest of America? Why am I making this point about it being a threat to American democracy? Because here's what fear does. Number 6, my sixth point. Here is the actual neuroscientific impact of fear. According to neuroscience research, here's what fear does to people. It makes them more accepting of authoritarianism, conformity, and prejudice. These 3 things: authoritarianism, conformity, and prejudice. 3 things that are corrosive to the very foundation of a democracy. Fear hurts America. Fear threatens freedom. Number 5, anti-Muslim bigotry is manufactured. This fear is not the outcome, the organic, natural, but regrettable outcome of bad Muslims doing bad things. We should all, let me be very clear, we should all, of course, be against violence of any kind against any group. But to believe that violence in the name of Islam is creating anti-Muslim prejudice is incorrect. It's not. And I will prove it to you. When you look at public opinion about Muslims and Islam on a timeline and compare it to terrorist attacks, they don't correlate. They have no correlation whatsoever. What spikes in anti-Muslim prejudice correlate with are not the acts of Muslim extremists. They correlate with two things: war, the drum up to war, like the Iraq War, and elections. War and elections. That's what correlates with anti-Muslim prejudice. It is rhetoric that is pushing people to accept a war that made no sense whatsoever, and it's rhetoric that pushes people to drum up fear to get votes. Fear hurts democracy. Number 4, according to this research I mentioned earlier that the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding issued and published on anti-Sharia legislation, this prejudice or this hysteria, this manufactured fear isn't just something that people, that as Muslims we're enduring psychological damage from, but it's impacting policy. In every state in the Union, at some point there was an anti-Sharia or anti-foreign law legislation proposed. And in about a couple dozen states, they've come very close to passing it, and in at least a dozen, these laws have actually passed. Now, why should you be afraid? This is legitimate fear now. Why should people of all faiths be against anti-Sharia legislation? I didn't really understand anti-Sharia legislation until I really did this research and read this report. Anti-Sharia legislation simply says that any document that is inspired by Sharia, based on Sharia principles, is not recognized by American courts. That means your marriage contract. That means your will. That means any contract or any agreement that mentions Sharia or can be proven to have been inspired by Sharia, targeting one faith community and eroding their religious liberty in the clearest way possible. Anti-Sharia legislation is a clear violation of the First Amendment, and it's being challenged in many states based on this principle. So prejudice and bigotry matter in real life because they inspire and they allow this kind of legislation to pass. So it hurts religious liberty generally. But not only that, the same report found something else that's incredibly important. That these legislators, these lawmakers who are proposing this anti-Sharia legislation, 80% of them, alongside anti-Sharia legislation that is targeting American Muslims, are also proposing other legislation that would curtail the rights of other communities, African Americans and Latinos, immigrants, labor unions, women, and others. So this is a clear and empirical demonstration of this idea of being canaries in the coal mine, of being the first ones to be hit by a toxic political climate. The same people who are trying to curtail the rights of Muslims are curtailing the rights of other communities. And it underscores the importance of coalition building in facing this problem. Those who are leading this campaign, and it is an organized effort, and this is not a conspiracy theory, this is documentation, want nothing more than to make this community feel weak and isolated. But that's exactly the opposite of the way we should feel. We have to feel not only like we have allies, but that it is up to us to save America from this evil, from this threat to its very democracy, which just happens to affect us first, but certainly not only. Number two is that the number one predictor of anti-Muslim prejudice, according to research, is anti-Jewish prejudice. Prejudice against Muslims is driven by other kinds of hate. It is not an isolated phenomena, and we should never feel that it's only impacting us or it is up to us alone to fight this problem. And finally, the number one thing that I think everyone should know about anti-Muslim bigotry is this. Knowing a Muslim helps alleviate or lessens the likelihood of someone having extreme prejudice toward Muslims. I think we've probably either heard this or just intuitively know it. That yes, knowing a Muslim helps people be less likely to harbor extreme prejudice. But what's often not understood is that a much more powerful factor against anti-Muslim prejudice is knowing about Islam, not just knowing a Muslim. And I say this with emphasis because growing up in America, there was a movement, a measurable movement away from teaching people about Islam. We've become less comfortable with this concept even. We want to tell them about Muslims as a group, and we feel if they knew us, if they just knew who we were regular human beings who ate Thanksgiving dinner, that everything would be okay. But the data shows that knowing a Muslim helps, but knowing Islam helps much, much more. Those who say they know a great deal about Islam are the least likely group to say that they have prejudice against Muslims, much more so than people who simply just know a Muslim. So with that, I leave you with a call to action, the second call to action tonight. And that is we have to organize. We have to work together. We have to work collectively. We have to create coalitions. And we have to face this issue with courage and compassion, not as victims, not as people who are afraid, who are asking for acceptance, but as a community that has a duty to help protect American democracy from a great threat to its very existence. Thank you.